United States. Good evening, my fellow Americans. We now stand 10 years past the midpoint of a century that has witnessed 4 major wars among great nations. Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
So you just finished listening to a clip from President Eisenhower in his 1961 farewell address, addressing the issues of the potential for the military-industrial complex to get out of control. Now, this is another issue that I paid attention to in the 2016 election. And it's one that, unfortunately, I don't think any politician that's been running in recent years would be taken seriously. And that is to pull out of all the war. President Trump ran against intervention. However, unfortunately, with certain appointees into the cabinet, I do have to question just how sincere his intentions really are to not use any more military involvement when you look at the fact that he nominated someone like John Bolton into his cabinet. John Bolton's wanted to attack Iran for years now. What we have to look at is the power, the military-industrial complex in this country. It's out of control. Okay? Going back to a point someone made a while back during an argument about all the bases we have around the world. I had a back and forth with a gentleman about that, and he was a Marine veteran. I have much respect for him. But his argument to me was we need a lot of the bases throughout the world for strategic reasons so that we can get to an area quickly. But we're not traveling by ship anymore all around the world. And by ship I mean old wooden warships. We have aircraft that can get anywhere in the world within just a matter of hours. We have much more sophisticated technology than we did once upon a time. And the thing is, study the American Revolution for a moment. We want it out from under the rule of British tyranny. Back at that point, there was a saying about the British Empire, that the sun never set on the British Empire. And the reason why that cliche existed is because the British literally occupied so many different countries throughout the world. Singapore, India, that Hong Kong once was under, British colonization. Okay? So the British had their influence all throughout the world. Okay? Now the United States has countries and military bases in countries all around the world. And I don't think there's anyone who would dispute that if one country wanted to open a military base in our country, we would lose our minds over it. Even if it was an ally of ours, we wouldn't want another military having a presence within this country. Okay? Now, some people are going to say, oh, well, we're protecting certain countries. We're protecting them. And true, that's what our purpose is supposed to be there. But some of these countries are still doing well enough for themselves that they are either able to take care of themselves or for the very least should be compensating this country for the protection that we are providing. It shouldn't be coming out of the funding of our tax dollars. But what the bigger thing is that ever since World War II, where we started building our own arms here at home, providing the things for our military, it became an industry. And such as we discussed the other day with the NAFTA trade deals and how business operates, military-industrial complex and the people who make the equipment for the military have a business to run. Their business is making the new airplanes, the new tanks, the new Humvee-type vehicles, the new guns, the new military uniforms. If there's not a war for us to have, there's no business for them. And keep in mind, going back to the video from yesterday, corporations continue to lobby the politicians, and bid for contracts. So there's financial interest to keep some sort of a conflict going. Okay? Some sort of conflict has to stay present in the world, so we have to keep providing these things. They have to look for a reason to get involved into something. Okay? So with that being said, let's examine what Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty said. Okay? And I will let that clip come straight from the man himself, Jesse Ventura, in an interview with Larry King.
You trust no one, right? You trust no one.
Yes, I trust certain people.
But you see things, when you see a situation, you see what was behind that.
I try to look because, Larry, my government's lied to me so often. I mean, let's look at recent years. They lied about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. They lied that Iraq was tied to al-Qaeda. They were not. They lied about the rescue of Jessica Lynch. They lied about the murder of Pat Tillman. The lies go on and on and on. So what's happened is the government has no credibility with me anymore.
Do you think Putin outflanked us?
I think he put himself, in a good position on this thing because Putin came out as the man of peace.
But he brought the deal. But if the end result is okay...
That's okay.
That's okay, right?
That's
So
okay.
what's the difference if he did it?
Absolutely. I'm tired of these wars. Clearly so are the majority of Americans now because I heard the calls to Congress were running over 300 to 1 opposing any military action
Everyone read that
in
wrong.
Syria. And finally, maybe the American people are waking up. If we wouldn't have got involved in all these wars that we've been in, we could have health care triple over. We could all have the best. And that's what gets me too. These congressmen and senators, they have 4 options on health care they can choose from. We don't even have one. How dare them get anything that an average citizen can't get?
You were a Navy SEAL.
A Navy frogman, that's correct.
But you sound like a peacenik.
I am.
And most people would assume that frogmen would be gung-ho militarist nationalists.
I was when I was 18 to 24 years old. I'm now 62.
What changed you?
Watching what happens, watching my country at perennial war, and not one of these wars accomplish a thing. It's like Colonel L. Fletcher Prouty said. There was a meeting that took place after Japan by the 4 leaders of Stalin, Chiang Kai-shek at the time, because Mao wasn't in yet, Churchill and Truman. And they all made an agreement at that time that all wars would be fought in third world countries and there'd be no direct objective the military could achieve in which to declare victory. It's true. Every war in my lifetime has been in a third world country and there's been no objective that can be achieved to declare victory. I'm tired of war. I'm sick of going to war. I'm sick of us spending. Larry, we spend more on defense than the top 25 countries combined, and 26. And 25 of them are our allies. Why do we need to spend all this money on defense? Let's cut defense spending.
There you go. Straight from the man himself, Jesse Ventura. There is, after the meeting, right after World War II, They all came to agreement. All the world wars would be fought in third world countries where there would be no direct objective by which we could declare victory. And that has been all that has been happening ever since then. I don't care. You look at Korea, Vietnam, First Gulf War, war in Iraq, and in all honesty, a lot of those wars weren't even wars that were approved on by Congress. So we enter into another thing now to where now presidents are able to just attack a country without having to go through Congress. Clear violation of what the Founding Fathers had in mind when they wrote the Constitution. Okay? And they really ramped this whole thing up under Bush. Okay? Now, I mean, you go all the way back to Vietnam to find where it started, but right after 9/11 is when they really, the Democrats and the Republicans just took the gloves off and handed the war power over to Bush. And he took us into Iraq, spent over $1 trillion on the war in Iraq, and what got accomplished? We finally killed Saddam Hussein, and then by the time that President Obama finally did pull us out of Iraq, and keep in mind that's something he ran on also. We're getting out of Iraq, we're getting out of Afghanistan, we're going to end all the wars. By the time he got us out of Iraq, Iraq was in shambles, and ISIS took over Iraq. Okay? But he didn't get us out of Afghanistan. And if anything, he took 2 wars and turned them into many more when he interfered in places like Libya. And what has happened to Libya ever since then? It became a complete failed state. Okay? And really, what the whole war in Libya came down to is the fact that Gaddafi was going to go off the petrodollar. And it would have hurt the world market, hurt the oil business, so we have to intervene for our own interests. Kind of similar to what our CIA used to do many, many years ago. They would go in and take out democratically elected leaders, place a dictator in charge who would be more favorable to American business. Okay? And false flag operations to get involved into wars. It's been going on for many, many years. Anyone who wants to see just what lengths certain people within the government will go to try to convince the people to go to war, go back to the Kennedy administration. The Joint Chief, this plan, if you want the name of it, look it up and do your research. Operation Northwoods made it all the way through the Joint Chiefs of Staff and was on President Kennedy's desk, and he refused to go with it. This is how bad they wanted to go to war in Cuba. They were willing, after the Cuban migrants had come into the country, to claim that these people were they were going to hijack airplanes and blame it on these Cuban people as if they were being infiltrated into the country and they were Castro loyalists, so that it would give us reason to go in and start the war in Cuba. They were so sore that the Bay of Pigs was an utter failure, they had to find a way to get the public on their side to go back to war. And why did they? See, they learned a lesson. We didn't get involved in World War I until the Lusitanians thing, okay? We didn't get involved in World War II until the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. Now we were involved. We weren't really boots on the ground, really. We really got into that war after we were attacked at Pearl Harbor. So, since then, the politicians and the people who were beholden to their donors from whatever camp they're getting money from, they realize if you were on the take from the military-industrial complex, the military-industrial complex realized this, so did the politicians. We have to create something that makes the public want to go to war. And the best thing to do that is make it look like the country we want to go to has done something to us or has attacked us. If we don't have that, the public's going to say we have no business getting involved in a war. We have to infuriate them. It's been happening ever since. Okay? And there's been no real victory in any of them. Okay? Not the way we used to have victories in wars. It's not happening anymore today, if you pay attention. All right? Now let's take a look at what one other person has to say about military involvement.
Aloha. So, Congresswoman, I'm going to ask you, always ask everybody who's running here, why? Why are you doing it?
You have that crazed look in your face. You know, after 9/11, like so many Americans, I wanted to do something to serve and protect our people and our country. So I enlisted in the Army National Guard, volunteered to deploy to Iraq, and in 2012, along with now Senator Tammy Duckworth, became one of the first female combat veterans ever elected to Congress. It is those values of service before self that every soldier, every service member represents that I want to bring to the White House, to reinstill those values of honor, integrity, and respect to the presidency.
Very brave of you to join up like that. That's great. Thank you.
It's my honor to serve.
Sure.
Thanks.
Now, how did your experience fighting in Iraq shape your outlook of the United States' role in foreign policy? Because in my research, I found that you have a strict non-interventionist approach, and you are against the United States entering countries and being there for this sort of regime change.
No, as a soldier, I deployed with our brigade combat team from Hawaii. I volunteered to deploy with them to Iraq in 2005, which was the height of the conflict there. I served in a medical unit where every single day I was confronted with, in a heart-wrenching way, the high human cost of war. Very first thing I did every single morning was go down a list of names of every single American casualty, every single service member who'd been injured the day before. And I had to see if any of our brigade soldiers were on that list, make sure they got the care that they needed, or to evacuate them as quickly as possible. But as I went through this list every single day, I was struck with the names and the faces of my brothers and sisters who were paying the price for this war. I was struck with their families, their loved ones at home, who were so stressed and so anxious for the well-being of their loved ones. It is those experiences of understanding and knowing firsthand the cost of war, both on our service members, on our veterans, as well as the cost on the people in the countries where we intervene, as well as the trillions of dollars, our taxpayer dollars that are spent on waging these wars, dollars that are sorely needed to address the very real urgent needs of our families, our communities, our neighbors right here at home.
So should we not get involved when we see atrocities abroad?
We have to understand, looking at Iraq, Libya, and Syria, for example, that there are brutal dictators in the world. And unfortunately, there are people who are suffering as a result of that. But in so many examples throughout history, when the United States takes action and intervenes and launches these regime change wars to topple these dictators, the suffering of the people in these countries increases. Their lives are made worse off than they were before. There is far more death and destruction. Libya is a perfect example. Muammar Gaddafi was toppled. Now, today, we have more terrorist groups in Libya than ever before. We have Libyan people, women and children, being sold in open markets as slaves. So while these wars
Which we didn't have before when he was there?
Which didn't exist before.
No?
And so
Could I interrupt you? Sorry,
let's just finish this one point, because we feel for the suffering of people in these countries, and we want to be able to help them. And so many of these wars are begun and waged from a place of humanitarianism.
Yeah.
But the reality is, and it's a harsh reality, that there is more suffering and more loss of life and more destruction as a result of these wars, which does not serve the people in these countries, nor does it serve our interests and our security.
Congresswoman, first, thank you for your service, which is something I say to everyone who has served that comes on the show, and I think it's important. That being said, my understanding is you know how I feel about your stance on foreign policy, and when I hear the name Tulsi Gabbard, I think of an Assad apologist. I think of someone who comes back to the United States and is spouting propaganda from Syria. You have said that the Syrian President Assad is not the enemy of the United States, yet he's used chemical weapons against his own people 300 times. That was a red line with President Obama. That is not our enemy. 13 million Syrians have been displaced. So when you say regime change is hurtful for the country, but gassing children isn't more hurtful, it's hard for me to understand where you come from a humanitarian standpoint if you were to become president.
Well, you're putting words in my mouth that I've never said.
You did
first
not
of all.
say that Syrian President Assad is not the enemy of the United States. Say it now, clarify.
The issue here is how can we help alleviate the suffering of people?
Just really one moment. Is he an enemy of the United States?
An enemy of the United States is someone who threatens our safety and our security. There is no disputing the fact that Bashar al-Assad in Syria is a brutal dictator. There is no disputing the fact that he has used chemical weapons and other weapons against his people. There are other terrorist groups in Syria who have used similar chemical weapons and other weapons of terror against the people of Syria. This is an unfortunate thing that wrenches at every one of our hearts. This is not something I'm disputing, nor am I apologizing or defending these actions. My point is that the reality we are facing here is that since the United States started waging a covert regime change war in Syria, starting in 2011, the lives of the Syrian people have not been improved. Their well-being has not gotten to a better place. Their suffering has not decreased. It has increased, in addition to the fact that Al-Qaeda is stronger in Syria today than ever before. So not only are we dealing with the fact that this regime change war we've been waging in Syria has not helped the Syrian people, it has made their lives worse off.
Bashar
It has
al-Assad
also,
gassing his people
it
has
has
not helped
also
either.
undermined our national security, leaving us in a place where Al-Qaeda is a stronger threat there than they ever have
Now,
been before.
Tulsi.
And Iran has greater influence in Syria than ever before.
Tulsi, you
I mean, how can you argue with that? You know, I was always raised, you should keep your nose in your own business. Don't go sticking it around in other people's business all the time. And I understand there are a lot of other countries who definitely have humanitarian crisis and have brutal leaders and brutal dictators. But why is it none of the other countries in the world who do promote some form of democracy or freedom, why are their militaries not getting involved in any of this? They're our allies. They're our allies. Why are they not helping this cause? Why don't their military go to any of these countries? Why is it only the United States? Because we have a system where we have to stay in war. Okay, just like the politicians who advocate for gun control, yet meanwhile the United States is the biggest arms dealer in the entire world. Yet we should give our firearms up. Okay? We should give our firearms up because there's certain people on the left who have issues with the Second Amendment and believe there should be more gun control and that we shouldn't be allowed to own certain types of guns. Okay? One issue where I'm really not with the left at all. But on this issue, I'm with Tulsi 100%. I'm with Tulsi 100%. That's one of the things I liked about Trump. He campaigned this way. And to some degree, he's lived up to it. He's definitely not the hawk some people thought he may be. But he has put some hawks in his cabinet like, again, John Bolton, for example. Okay? But let's remember now, the whole way we got into the war in Iraq. Okay? The Bush family was heavily involved in the oil business. If you really want to do the research on that, look up the connection the Bush family had with Salem bin Laden and the bin Laden family. Okay? The Bushes were pretty tied up in oil. Okay? Iraq was a very oil-rich country. Okay? But more importantly, the bigger, to me, what I would call a conflict of interest that stood out from the war in Iraq was the fact that the vice president of the United States that time was a man named Dick Cheney. And of course, he and Bush took deferments to get out of going into the military when they were drafted. They didn't want to go serve when their time was called, but they were so gung-ho and quick to get us into a war. Now, what was Dick Cheney in charge of before becoming the vice president of the United States? Anyone ever heard of a company called Halliburton? Okay. Dick Cheney was over Halliburton before becoming the vice president of the United States. And what company was contracted to go into the Middle East and start the repair and the cleanup from all the war damage? Well, What company was that again? Halliburton. Okay? Does anyone see the connection here? To quote another Jesse Ventura line, follow the money. Follow the money. We have to get out of all this endless war. And if we do get out of all this endless war and stop spending all this unnecessary money on all these conflicts to keep our military so stretched out to the rest of the world, as Jesse Ventura has said, we would have more money for health care. The big health care debate. Can we afford single payer? Can we not afford single payer? We would have more money to come up with some form of a health care program for the citizens of this country to make it some. It doesn't have to be complete single payer or Medicare for all. Those are issues that can be debated later on as far as costs go. But there is definitely a system we can create. If we saved all that money, we would have more money to do it than we could shake a stick at. Period. But instead of trying to use our money in our own country, we want to spend it to go do things like that. For example, a report that came out not very long ago, they wanted to open up a military base in Niger. But before they could open up that military base, they had to build surrounding infrastructure for this military base in Niger. So we can't build infrastructure here at home. We can't fix our roads here at home. We can't fix our bridges here at home. We can't give Flint, Michigan clean drinking water. But we're going to go build infrastructure in another country so we can build a military base within that country. Does anyone see the problem here? We elected the politicians to serve us. We didn't elect them to go serve the needs of other countries. We elected them to make sure we were well off here at home. And they're spending our tax money to go build things in another country while our infrastructure is falling apart. I mean, you can't get any more crazy with this sort of thing. So we have to put an end to this. This is an issue that people on the right and the left need to come together on, and the independents need to all come together on. We have to set our foot down in the elections and make it clear these endless wars have to stop. They have to stop. If you like the video, please like and share. Please subscribe to the channel. If you have any comments, drop a comment below. Have a good day.